Hey there, and welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new, hit that subscribe button for spine-tingling Reddit creepypasta stories that are perfect for a night of chilling thrills. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and let's get into tonight's stories. Dark web forum that knew my deepest fears and turned them into reality. I never should have gone down that rabbit hole. It started innocently enough, just a curiosity sparked by those endless threads about the dark web. You know, the ones with all the warnings and the horror stories. I always thought they were just that, stories. But one night, my boredom got the better of me. I found a link on a shady forum and, against my better judgment, clicked on it. The website was called the Dark Forum. It required an invite, and I wasn't sure how to get one. I posted on a few subreddits, trying to fish for information without sounding too desperate. Eventually, someone DM'd me, claiming they had an invite. All they wanted in return was a small favour later down the line. I agreed without thinking twice. Big mistake. The invite came through, and I was in. The forum was dark, both literally and metaphorically. Black backgrounds with blood red text. The topics ranged from illegal trades to conspiracy theories. And then there was a section called Fears. It piqued my interest immediately. People posted about their deepest fears, and others responded with creepy, detailed scenarios exploiting those fears. It was twisted, but I couldn't look away. One night, after a few drinks, I decided to post my own fear. Just for fun, I thought. I wrote about my worst nightmare, being buried alive. I described it in excruciating detail, the suffocating darkness, the panic, the slow depletion of air. I hit post and went to bed, laughing at my own stupidity. The next morning, I had dozens of replies. Most were the usual dark web trolls, but one stood out. It was from a user named Reaper. His response was chillingly specific, describing the feeling of dirt filling my lungs and the desperate clawing at the coffin lid. He even knew about my childhood fear of the dark, something I hadn't mentioned in my post. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few days, I started getting strange messages from Reaper. They were always about my fear, always disturbingly accurate. I started to get paranoid, checking my surroundings constantly. I thought about leaving the forum, but I was too deep in by then. Then, one night, it happened. I was coming home late from work when I felt a prick in my neck. Everything went black. When I woke up, I was in complete darkness. The air was stale, and the walls around me were cold and unyielding. I screamed, but my voice was muffled. I realized with horror that I was in a coffin. I panicked, trying to push the lid off, but it wouldn't budge. I screamed until my throat was raw, but no one could hear me. I could feel the air getting thinner. My thoughts raced. How did this happen? Who did this to me? And then I remembered. Reaper. This was his doing. Somehow, he had found me and made my worst fear a reality. I started clawing at the lid, my nails breaking and fingers bleeding. The pain was intense, but the fear was worse. I don't know how long I was down there. Hours, days. It felt like an eternity. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard a noise above me. The lid creaked open and fresh air flooded in. I gasped, my lungs burning as they filled with oxygen. A masked figure stood above me, silhouetted against the moonlight. He didn't say a word, just stared at me. I recognized the eyes. It was Reaper. He reached down, pulling me out of the coffin with surprising gentleness. I was too weak to fight back, too terrified to speak. He left me on the ground, gasping for breath. I could hear him walking away, his footsteps fading into the night. When I finally managed to get up, I found myself in a graveyard surrounded by headstones and freshly dug graves. I stumbled home, my mind racing. How had he found me? Why had he done this? When I got back to my apartment, I found my computer on, the Dark Forum open. There was a new message from Reaper. "Did you enjoy my little game?" It read. "Let's see what else you're afraid of." That was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Reaper tormented me relentlessly. He knew all my fears: spiders, heights, drowning, and he exploited every single one. It was like he had a window into my soul, knowing exactly what would break me. Dark web forum that knew my deepest fears and turned them into reality. I never should have gone down that rabbit hole. It started innocently enough, just a curiosity sparked by those endless threads about the dark web. You know, the ones with all the warnings and the horror stories. I always thought they were just that, stories. But one night, my boredom got the better of me. I found a link on a shady forum and, against my better judgment, clicked on it. The website was called the Dark Forum. It required an invite, and I wasn't sure how to get one. I posted on a few subreddits, trying to fish for information without sounding too desperate. Eventually, someone DM'd me, claiming they had an invite. All they wanted in return was a small favour later down the line. I agreed without thinking twice. Big mistake. The invite came through, and I was in. The forum was dark, both literally and metaphorically. Black backgrounds with blood-red text. The topics ranged from illegal trades to conspiracy theories, and then there was a section called Fears. It piqued my interest immediately. People posted about their deepest fears, and others responded with creepy, detailed scenarios exploiting those fears. It was twisted, but I couldn't look away. One night, after a few drinks, I decided to post my own fear. Just for fun, I thought. I wrote about my worst nightmare, being buried alive. I described it in excruciating detail, the suffocating darkness, the panic, the slow depletion of air. I hit post and went to bed, laughing at my own stupidity. The next morning, I had dozens of replies. Most were the usual dark web trolls, but one stood out. It was from a user named Reaper. His response was chillingly specific, describing the feeling of dirt filling my lungs and the desperate clawing at the coffin lid. He even knew about my childhood fear of the dark, something I hadn't mentioned in my post. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few days, I started getting strange messages from Reaper. They were always about my fear, always disturbingly accurate. I started to get paranoid, checking my surroundings constantly. I thought about leaving the forum, but I was too deep in by then. Then, one night, it happened. I was coming home late from work when I felt a prick in my neck. Everything went black. When I woke up, I was in complete darkness. The air was stale, and the walls around me were cold and unyielding. I screamed, but my voice was muffled. I realized with horror that I was in a coffin. I panicked, trying to push the lid off, but it wouldn't budge. I screamed until my throat was raw, but no one could hear me. I could feel the air getting thinner. My thoughts raced. How did this happen? Who did this to me? And then I remembered. Reaper. This was his doing. Somehow, he had found me and made my worst fear a reality. I started clawing at the lid, my nails breaking and fingers bleeding. The pain was intense, but the fear was worse. I don't know how long I was down there. Hours, days. It felt like an eternity. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard a noise above me. The lid creaked open and fresh air flooded in. I gasped, my lungs burning as they filled with oxygen. A masked figure stood above me, silhouetted against the moonlight. He didn't say a word, just stared at me. I recognized the eyes. It was Reaper. He reached down, pulling me out of the coffin with surprising gentleness. I was too weak to fight back, too terrified to speak. He left me on the ground, gasping for breath. I could hear him walking away, his footsteps fading into the night. When I finally managed to get up, I found myself in a graveyard surrounded by headstones and freshly dug graves. I stumbled home, my mind racing. How had he found me? Why had he done this? When I got back to my apartment, I found my computer on, the Dark Forum open. There was a new message from Reaper. "Did you enjoy my little game?" it read. "Let's see what else you're afraid of." That was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Reaper tormented me relentlessly. He knew all my fears: spiders, heights, drowning, and he exploited every single one. It was like he had a window into my soul, knowing exactly what would break me. I couldn't go to the police. What would I say? That someone from the dark web was making my fears come true. They'd lock me up in a padded cell. I tried to disconnect, to get off the grid, but it was no use. Reaper always found me. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making, with no way out. And the worst part, I knew it was only going to get worse. I barely slept after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the inside of that coffin, felt the dirt pressing in on me. But sleep deprivation was the least of my worries. Reaper's messages kept coming, each one more terrifying than the last. One day, I found a package on my doorstep. No return address, just my name written in neat black letters. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside was a small box with a note. Open it and see. Against my better judgment, I lifted the lid. Hundreds of tiny spiders poured out, crawling up my arms and into my apartment. I screamed, flailing, trying to brush them off, but they were everywhere. I ran into the shower, turning the water on full blast, my skin crawling with the memory of their tiny legs. After that, I tried to leave my apartment as little as possible. I stocked up on supplies and barricaded myself inside, but it didn't matter. Reaper always found a way to get to me. He sent more packages, a jar of dead roaches, a box of fake blood, and once, a severed doll's head with my name carved into its forehead. I was unraveling. My friends noticed I was acting strange, but I couldn't tell them the truth. Who would believe me? I was alone in this nightmare, and Reaper knew it. One evening, I received another message from him. This one was different. It wasn't a threat, but an invitation. Join me on a video call. Let's talk. Every fibre of my being screamed not to do it, but I was desperate. Maybe if I talked to him, I could reason with him, make him stop. I agreed and logged onto the dark web forum. His video call request popped up almost instantly. When I answered, his face filled the screen. He was wearing a black mask, only his eyes visible. Those cold, calculating eyes. "Hello," he said, his voice distorted. "What do you want from me?" I blurted out. He chuckled. "It's not about what I want, it's about what you fear." "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because I can," he replied, "and because you made it so easy." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" "You shared your deepest fears with strangers on the internet. You practically handed me the keys to your nightmares. I'm just utilizing them." I felt sick. "Please, just stop. I can't take it anymore." He tilted his head, as if considering my plea. "Maybe, but where's the fun in that?" The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my reflection in the dark screen. I was shaking, my mind racing. I had to do something. I couldn't live like this anymore. I decided to fight back. I spent hours researching how to track someone on the dark web. It wasn't easy, and I knew I was way out of my depth, but I didn't care. I had to find a way to stop him. Days turned into weeks. I barely ate, barely slept, consumed by my obsession with finding Reaper. I followed every lead, no matter how small, but it always led to a dead end. He was always one step ahead. Then, one night, I found something. A tiny crack in his armor. I was combing through old posts on the forum, looking for anything that might give me a clue about his identity, when I found a thread he'd commented on years ago. It was about a hacking technique that was obscure and outdated, something only a handful of people would know about. I took a chance and posted a question in the thread, pretending to be interested in the technique. Sure enough, Reaper responded. I engaged him in conversation, trying to glean any information I could without raising suspicion. It took weeks of careful manipulation, but I finally got what I needed, a hint about his location. He mentioned a specific detail about a local event that only someone living in the area would know. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I hired a private investigator to help me. I couldn't go to the police, but I needed someone who knew how to track people down. I gave him everything I had, praying it would be enough. While I waited for the investigator to do his work, I kept up the charade with Reaper, acting like I was still his terrified victim. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. but I had to keep him believing he was in control. One evening, I received a call from the investigator. "I've got a lead," he said. "It's not concrete, but it's something. I'll keep digging." It wasn't much, but it was hope. For the first time in months, I felt like I might have a chance to end this nightmare. But Reaper wasn't done with me yet. The next day, I received another package. Inside was a videotape. I hesitated, my hands shaking as I inserted it into the old VCR I dug out of my closet. The screen flickered to life, showing grainy footage of a dark room. A figure sat in the center, bound and gagged. As the camera zoomed in, I recognized the face. It was my best friend. Reaper's voice came through the speakers, distorted but unmistakable. "Your move," he said. My blood ran cold. He had my friend, and now I had to make a choice. Keep playing his twisted game, or risk losing someone I loved. I was trapped, and there was no way out. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. My best friend was tied up, scared out of their mind, and it was all because of me. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This had gone too far, way too far. I tried calling my friend's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic set in. I had no idea where they were or what Reaper would do next. I needed help, but I couldn't trust anyone. Not the police, not even the private investigator. Reaper had eyes everywhere. Reaper's message came through a few minutes later. "Do as I say, and your friend might live." I had no choice but to comply. His instructions were clear. Go to a specified location and follow his commands to the letter. It felt like a trap, but I couldn't risk my friend's life. I packed a bag and left my apartment, my heart racing. The address led me to an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was dark and abandoned, the perfect place for Reaper to hide. I hesitated at the entrance, my hands shaking. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. The interior was cold and damp, with a faint smell of decay. I called out, but only my echo answered. As I ventured further, I found a note taped to the wall. "Down the hall, third door on the left." Every step felt like I was walking into my own grave. I reached the door and pushed it open. The room was dimly lit, with a single chair in the center. On the chair was my friend, still bound and gagged. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. I couldn't see anyone else, but I knew Reaper was watching. I ran to my friend, quickly untying the ropes. They were shaking, tears streaming down their face. "We need to get out of here," I whispered. Before we could move, the door slammed shut. A voice crackled over an unseen speaker. "Leaving so soon?" I spun around, trying to find the source of the voice. "What do you want?" I yelled. Reaper's laugh echoed through the room. "I told you, it's about your fears. Let's see how far you'll go to face them." The lights went out, plunging us into darkness. My friend screamed, and I felt around blindly, trying to find them. Suddenly, the room filled with the sound of scuttling. My skin crawled as I realized what it was. Spiders, hundreds of them. I grabbed my friend's hand, pulling them towards the door. We stumbled through the darkness, our feet crunching over the spiders. My heart pounded in my ears, but we kept moving. We had to get out of there. We finally reached the door, but it was locked. I pounded on it, screaming for help, but there was no answer. The spiders were everywhere, crawling up our legs, into our clothes. My friend was hyperventilating, and I felt like I was about to lose it. Then, a faint light appeared at the end of the hall. "This way!" I shouted, dragging my friend towards it. We ran as fast as we could, the spiders still clinging to us. The light led us to another door, and I threw it open, praying it wasn't another trap. We burst into the night air, collapsing on the ground outside the warehouse. I ripped off my jacket, shaking out the spiders, my friend doing the same. We sat there panting, trying to catch our breath, but the nightmare wasn't over. My phone buzzed with another message from Reaper. "You can run, but you can't hide. This is just the beginning." I wanted to scream, to throw my phone into the river and disappear, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Reaper would always find me. I had to end this, once and for all. I called the private investigator, explaining everything as fast as I could. He listened, his voice calm and steady. "We'll get him," he promised, "but you need to be careful. He's dangerous. I knew that better than anyone. We made a plan to track Reaper down, to find out who he was and stop him. It was risky, but it was our only shot. For the next few days, we worked tirelessly, tracing every lead, every clue. My friend stayed with me, too scared to be alone. We barely slept, barely ate, consumed by the hunt for Reaper. Then we found him. The investigator managed to trace his IP address to a small house on the outskirts of town. We gathered our courage and drove there, ready to confront the man who had turned my life into a living hell. The house was unremarkable, just a small, run-down building. We approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The investigator knocked on the door, and we waited. A man answered, looking surprised to see us. He was average-looking, with glasses and a nervous demeanor. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice shaking. "We know who you are," the investigator said. "It's over." The man's face paled, and he tried to slam the door, but we pushed our way inside. He stumbled back, tripping over a chair. "Please, you don't understand," he pleaded. I stepped forward, my anger boiling over. "You ruined my life. You tortured me. Why?" He looked up at me, tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It was just a game at first, but then I couldn't stop. I wanted to hurt him, to make him feel the fear and pain he had caused me, but I knew it wouldn't change anything." The investigator called the police, and they took him away. As I watched him being led out in handcuffs, I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. It was over, but the scars would remain. Reaper was gone, but the nightmare he created would haunt me forever. You'd think after they arrested Reaper, I'd feel safe again, but I didn't. Even with him behind bars, the fear he planted in me grew roots that I couldn't dig out. I moved out of my apartment and crashed on my friend's couch, but sleep was elusive, and every shadow looked like a threat. My friend tried to help. They stuck by me through it all, even though they were just as scared. We talked a lot, trying to make sense of everything, but there was no making sense of it. The things Reaper did weren't logical or sane. The first few weeks after the arrest were the hardest. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I was still in that coffin or covered in spiders. The nightmares felt real, and sometimes I couldn't tell if I was awake or dreaming. Therapy seemed like the obvious choice, so I started seeing a therapist. It helped to talk, to get it all out, but there were things I couldn't say, things too dark and twisted to put into words. I felt broken, like Reaper had taken a part of me I'd never get back. Work was impossible. I couldn't focus, couldn't be around people. My boss was understanding at first, but I knew it wouldn't last. I took a leave of absence, hoping I could pull myself together, but every day felt like a battle just to get out of bed. The private investigator checked in on me a few times. He was a decent guy, and I think he felt guilty that he couldn't have stopped Reaper sooner, but I didn't blame him. Reaper was a master at hiding in plain sight. He'd fooled everyone. One day, about a month after Reaper's arrest, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in neat black letters. My heart sank. I knew that handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with a short message. "Did you really think it was over?" I dropped the letter like it burned me. It couldn't be real. Reaper was in jail. He couldn't reach me. But the fear crept back in, wrapping around my throat like a noose. I called the police, showed them the letter. They took it seriously, but there wasn't much they could do. It could have been a prank, they said, someone messing with me. But I knew it was more than that. I started seeing threats everywhere. Strangers on the street seemed suspicious. Cars that followed me for too long felt like they were stalking me. I couldn't shake the feeling that Reaper had a long reach, even from a prison cell. The therapist suggested I get away, take a break from everything, so I packed a bag and left town. My friend came with me, and we drove to a cabin in the mountains. It was isolated, surrounded by woods, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a bit of peace. The first few days were calm. We hiked, cooked meals together, tried to pretend everything was normal. but the tranquility was fragile. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting Reaper to appear out of nowhere. One night, while we were sitting by the fire, my friend brought up the letter. "Do you think it's really him?" they asked, their voice barely a whisper. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I knew. "Yeah," I said. "It's him. He's not done with me yet." That night, I had the worst nightmare of all. I was back in the coffin, but this time, I wasn't alone. Reaper was there, whispering in my ear, his breath cold against my skin. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. My friend held me, trying to calm me down, but the fear wouldn't go away. We decided to cut the trip short. The cabin wasn't safe anymore. Nowhere was. We packed up and headed back to the city, but I knew things would never be the same. When we got back, I checked my email. There was a message from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "Miss me?" I hesitated before opening it. The email was short, just a few words. "You can't hide forever." I felt a cold dread settle over me. Reaper might be in jail, but his reach was long. He had followers, people who shared his twisted love for fear. They would keep his game going no matter what. I realized then that this wasn't just about me anymore. It was bigger than that. Reaper had created something that would outlive him. A network of terror that could strike at anyone, anywhere. I had to stop it. Somehow, I had to end this once and for all, but I didn't know where to start. All I knew was that the nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. I knew I couldn't keep running. Reaper had too many resources, too many followers willing to carry out his sick plans. I had to face him, but I needed help. I reached out to the private investigator again. He was reluctant at first, but when I explained everything, he agreed to help. We spent days planning. We needed to find out who Reaper's followers were and how they communicated. The investigator had connections and was able to get access to some dark web forums. We found threads discussing me, filled with people eager to continue Reaper's work. We tracked down one of the more active users, someone who seemed to know a lot about Reaper's plans. The investigator managed to get their location, and we decided to confront them. It was risky, but I didn't see any other way. The user lived in a rundown apartment in a bad part of town. We waited until nightfall and then made our move. The investigator picked the lock and we slipped inside. The place was a mess, filled with computers and papers. The user, a middle-aged man, was sitting at his desk, typing away. He jumped when he saw us. "Who are you? What do you want?" "We know you're working with Reaper," I said, stepping forward. "Tell us everything you know." He tried to deny it, but the investigator showed him the evidence we had. The man broke down, admitting that Reaper had been planning something big. He had a list of targets, people he wanted to terrorize just like he did to me. "Where is he?" I demanded. "How is he still contacting you?" "He has a phone," the man confessed, "a hidden one that the guards don't know about. He's been using it to give us orders." I felt a surge of anger. Even in jail, Reaper was still pulling the strings. "Give me the list," I said. The man handed over a piece of paper, his hands shaking. The list was long, filled with names and details about each person's fears. I knew I had to stop this. We left the apartment, the investigator promising to hand the man over to the police. We drove straight to the prison where Reaper was being held. I knew it wouldn't be easy to get in, but the investigator had connections. He managed to arrange a meeting with Reaper under the guise of an official interrogation. When we walked into the interrogation room, Reaper was sitting there, his mask removed. He looked ordinary, almost pathetic, but his eyes were still cold and calculating. "Well, well," he said, smiling. "Look who it is." "This ends now," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "We know about your phone. We know about your plans." He shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "You can't stop it. There will always be someone to take my place." I stepped closer, my fists clenched. "Maybe, but you won't be around to see it." The investigator signaled to the guards, who stepped forward and took Reaper away. They found the hidden phone, cutting off his communication with his followers. It was a small victory, but it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Reaper was transferred to a maximum security prison where he'd have no contact with the outside world. The police raided the apartments of his followers, arresting them and shutting down their operations. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. I moved to a new city, changed my name, and started over. It wasn't easy. The nightmares still haunted me, and I knew I'd never be the same. But I was alive, and Reaper was behind bars. I still checked my surroundings constantly, always wary of the shadows. I couldn't forget what happened, but I learned to live with it. Therapy helped, and so did my friend, who stuck by me through everything. One day, I received a letter in the mail. My heart stopped when I saw the familiar handwriting. I opened it, my hands trembling. Inside was a single piece of paper with a short message. It's never over. I burned the letter, watching the flames consume the words. Maybe Reaper was right. Maybe it would never be over, but I wasn't going to let him control my life anymore. I had faced my fears and survived. I was stronger than he ever knew. I moved forward, one day at a time, determined to rebuild my life. Reaper might have started this nightmare, but I was going to end it, no matter what it took. And if he ever came for me again, I'd be ready. I discovered a secret cult on the dark web, and they're hunting me down. I've always been fascinated by the dark web. I know, it sounds stupid and reckless, but there's something about the unknown that pulls me in. It's like looking into an abyss and wanting to know what's at the bottom. So, one night, after a few beers and a stupid dare from a friend, I decided to dive in. I set up everything: Tor browser, VPN, the works. After navigating through the usual drug markets and fake passports, I stumbled upon a link that simply said, "The truth behind the curtain." It was intriguing, vague enough to pique my curiosity, but not overly suspicious. I clicked on it, and my life changed forever. The site was a mess of black and red text, with a single video link in the middle of the screen. I hesitated but clicked on it anyway. The video was grainy, poorly lit, but I could make out a group of people in masks, chanting in a language I didn't recognize. At first, it seemed like some weird performance art, but as the video continued, the chanting grew more intense, and the participants began to cut themselves, drawing strange symbols on the floor with their blood. I was horrified, but couldn't look away. Then, the camera zoomed in on a symbol drawn in the center of the circle, a 5-pointed star within a circle, surrounded by cryptic runes. Something about it felt ancient, wrong. The video ended abruptly, and I was left staring at a black screen with the words, "Welcome to the Abyss." My heart was pounding, but my curiosity was insatiable. I noticed a chat box at the bottom of the page. People were discussing the video, sharing theories and experiences. I joined in, using a fake name, of course. It was mostly the usual conspiracy theorists and wannabe occultists, but one user stood out. Their name was Oracle_of_darkness, and their messages were cryptic but confident, as if they knew something the rest of us didn't. After a few hours of chatting, Oracle_of_darkness sent me a private message. They claimed to be part of a secret cult that controlled everything from the shadows. They said they had seen me in the video chat and that I had potential. They invited me to join their inner circle. I was freaked out, but also strangely excited. I agreed, thinking it was all a big joke. That's when things got really disturbing. Oracle_of_darkness sent me a link to another site, this one requiring a special invite code to enter. Once inside, I found myself in a forum filled with posts about rituals, sacrifices, and mind control techniques. There were videos and pictures of people being tortured, mutilated, even killed. It was like stepping into a nightmare. I wanted to close the browser and forget everything, but I couldn't. Something was keeping me there, compelling me to explore further. I spent hours going through the posts, my stomach turning with every new revelation. These people were serious, and their reach was terrifying. They had members in governments, corporations, law enforcement, everywhere. They called themselves the Enlightened, and their goal was to bring about a new world order through chaos and bloodshed. I finally forced myself to log off, but the images and sounds haunted me. I barely slept that night, and when I did, I had nightmares of masked figures chanting in the darkness. The next day, I found a package on my doorstep. It was a small, unmarked box. Inside, there was a black envelope with a note that simply said, "Welcome to the Abyss. We are watching." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. How had they found me? I had been so careful. I wanted to call the police, but what would I tell them? That I had been snooping around on the dark web and pissed off a secret cult. They'd laugh me out of the station. I tried to go about my day as usual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I looked out the window, I swore I saw shadows moving in the corner of my eye. Paranoia was eating me alive. Then, a few days later, I received another message from Oracle_of_darkness. This time, it was a video link. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the mouse, but I clicked it. The video was a live feed of my apartment. I could see myself sitting at my desk, staring at the screen in horror. The camera zoomed in, and I realized it was coming from the corner of the room, where a small black device was blinking. They had bugged my apartment. Panic set in. I tore the place apart, searching for more devices. I found 3, one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in the bathroom. I destroyed them all, but I knew it was too late. They had already seen everything. I tried to go to the police, but they didn't take me seriously. Without proof, they couldn't do anything. That night, I heard strange noises outside my window. I looked out and saw a group of masked figures standing in the street, staring up at me. They didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. I closed the curtains and sat in the dark, shaking. My phone buzzed with a new message. "You can't hide from the truth." I didn't sleep at all that night. Every creak and rustle made my heart race. I knew they were out there waiting. The next day, I found another note on my doorstep. This one was more direct. "Join us or suffer the consequences." I felt trapped, cornered. I didn't know who to trust or where to turn. I considered running, but I knew they would find me. They had already proven they could. Desperation led me back to the dark web, hoping to find some way out, some loophole I could exploit. That's when I stumbled upon a thread about escaping the cult. It was filled with stories from people who claimed to have done it, but most of them were clearly fake. Then I found a post from someone named Shadow Walker. Their story sounded real, and they offered to help anyone who needed it. I sent them a message, praying for a miracle. Shadow Walker replied quickly. They told me they had been part of the cult, but managed to escape by faking their death. They warned me that it wouldn't be easy, but they could guide me through it. I didn't have any other options, so I agreed. The first step, they said, was to disappear completely. I needed to leave no trace, cut all ties, and change my identity. It sounded impossible, but they assured me it could be done. Over the next few weeks, I followed their instructions to the letter. I withdrew all my money, destroyed my phone, and left my apartment. I travelled across the country, staying in cheap motels and using fake names. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were always one step behind. I saw shadows in every corner, heard whispers in every room. I was losing my mind, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving, keep hiding, or they would find me. And then one night, I got a message from Shadow Walker. It was a single word: run. I didn't question it. I grabbed my bag and fled the motel, disappearing into the night. I don't know how long I can keep this up. Every day is a struggle, every night a nightmare, but I can't go back. The cult is everywhere, and they're hunting me down. I don't know how this will end, but I'll keep fighting, keep running, until I can't anymore. The dark web showed me a glimpse of hell, and now I'm living in it. After I got that message from Shadow Walker, telling me to run, I didn't think twice. I grabbed my bag and bolted out of the motel. The air was chilly and the streets were empty, but I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see those masked figures chasing me. I took a bus to a different city. I didn't even care where it was going, as long as it was far away. The ride was long and uncomfortable, but I was too wired to sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out how the hell I got into this mess. How had I gone from a curious explorer of the dark web to a target of a secret cult? I arrived in a small town around dawn. It was one of those places you pass through without noticing, but for now, it would be my refuge. I found a rundown motel and checked in using a fake name. The room was grimy, with peeling wallpaper and a bed that creaked with every move. But it was a place to hide. I spent the first few days in a state of paranoia, jumping at every sound. I didn't leave the room, living off the snacks I had in my bag. I stayed glued to my laptop, trying to find any new information about the cult. I needed to know more about them if I had any chance of staying one step ahead. One night, I got another message from Shadow Walker. They asked if I was safe and told me to keep moving. They said the cult had resources beyond anything I could imagine, tracking tech, connections in high places, everything. I thanked them for the warning, but I was starting to feel like I was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. The isolation was driving me crazy. I needed to get out, to feel the sun on my face and breathe fresh air. I decided to take a risk and venture out during the day, when it was less likely for the cult to make a move. I wore a hoodie and kept my head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. I found a small coffee shop and sat in a corner, trying to blend in. The normalcy of the place was comforting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time the door opened, I tensed up, ready to bolt, but nothing happened, and I started to relax, just a little. Then, I noticed something odd. A man sitting a few tables away was staring at me. He was dressed in a dark suit, with a blank expression. Our eyes met, and he gave me a small, knowing smile. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my coffee and left, walking quickly back to the motel, my heart racing. When I got back to my room, I checked my laptop. Another message from Shadow Walker. They're close. Be careful. My paranoia spiked. How were they always one step ahead? I felt like a rat in a maze, constantly running but getting nowhere. I knew I couldn't stay in that town any longer. I packed my bag and left, heading to the bus station. I bought a ticket to a random city and kept moving. This became my life, constantly on the move, never staying in one place for more than a few days. I used cash for everything and avoided using my real name. Despite all my efforts, I still felt their presence. It was like a dark cloud hanging over me, always there, always watching. I started having nightmares again, vivid, horrifying dreams of being caught, tortured, and killed. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. One night, while staying in another cheap motel, I decided to dig deeper into Shadow Walker's story. They had helped me a lot, but I realized I knew almost nothing about them. I started searching through old forum posts, piecing together bits of information. It was clear they had been through hell with the cult, but the details were vague. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. A post from years ago, written by someone who claimed to have known Shadow Walker. They said Shadow Walker wasn't just an escapee. They had been one of the cult's leaders. According to the post, Shadow Walker had orchestrated some of the most brutal rituals before they supposedly turned against the cult. I didn't know what to believe. Was Shadow Walker really trying to help me? Or was this some twisted game? I felt more alone than ever, unsure of who to trust. But one thing was clear. I couldn't stop running. The cult was relentless and I had to stay ahead. I moved again. This time to a big city where I hoped I could disappear in the crowd. The noise and bustle were overwhelming, but it was better than the eerie silence of small towns. I found a cheap hostel and tried to lay low, blending in with the other travelers. But the city wasn't the safe haven I hoped it would be. One evening, while walking back to the hostel, I noticed a familiar symbol spray painted on a wall, the 5-pointed star within a circle. surrounded by cryptic runes. My stomach dropped. They were here too. I hurried back to the hostel, my mind racing. How could they find me so quickly? I needed to leave, but I was exhausted, both mentally and physically. I couldn't keep this up forever. I felt trapped, like a cornered animal with no way out. That night, I received another message from Shadow Walker. It was longer than usual, filled with warnings and advice. But one sentence stood out. There's a way to end this, but it's risky. Meet me, and I'll explain everything. I stared at the screen, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Could I trust Shadow Walker? Did I even have a choice? I knew I couldn't keep running forever. I needed to take a stand, to fight back somehow. I replied with a single word, "Where?" Shadow Walker's response came quickly, with an address and a time. It was in a different part of the city, a place I didn't know. I packed my bag and left the hostel, my heart pounding. This was it, the moment that could end my nightmare, one way or another. I arrived at the address, a rundown warehouse on the edge of town. It was dark, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. I hesitated at the entrance, my instincts screaming at me to run, but I forced myself to step inside. The air was cold and musty, and the only light came from a few flickering bulbs hanging from the ceiling. I walked deeper into the building, every sound echoing around me. Then I saw a figure standing in the shadows, wearing a dark hooded cloak. "Shadow Walker!" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure stepped forward, lowering their hood. It was a woman, her face lined with scars, and her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "Yes," she said, "I'm Shadow Walker, and I'm here to help you end this." I took a deep breath, my fear and doubt mixing with a glimmer of hope. This was my chance. I just had to trust her and hope that it wasn't all another trap. Meeting Shadow Walker face to face was surreal. She looked tired, worn down by years of running and hiding, just like me. She led me to a small room in the back of the warehouse where we sat on old crates. She wasted no time. "The cult, the enlightened, is relentless," she began. "They don't just let people go. Once you're in their sights, it's a fight to the death." I nodded, my mind still reeling from everything I'd been through. "Why are you helping me?" She sighed, her eyes distant. "I was one of them once. I believed in their cause until I saw the horrors firsthand. I couldn't take it anymore, so I ran. Now I help people like you who get caught in their web." I wanted to trust her, but the doubt lingered. "So what's the plan?" Shadow Walker pulled out a map, laying it on the crate between us. "We need to get you out of the country. There's a safe house across the border where you can lay low until things cool down." "How do we get there?" I asked, eyeing the complex routes marked on the map. "It won't be easy. The cult has eyes everywhere. We'll travel by night, avoid main roads, and use safe houses along the way." It sounded like a plan from a spy movie, but I didn't have a choice. I agreed, and we spent the next few hours planning our route, gathering supplies, and making contingency plans. Shadow Walker seemed to know exactly what she was doing, and her confidence was reassuring. As night fell, we set out. The city was a labyrinth of dark alleys and hidden paths. Shadow Walker led the way, moving with a quiet efficiency that spoke of years of experience. I followed closely, my senses on high alert. Our first stop was an old building that looked abandoned from the outside. Inside, it was a different story. It was a safe house, stocked with food, water, and basic medical supplies. We rested for a few hours, catching what sleep we could. Around midnight, we moved again. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sounds our footsteps and the occasional distant siren. We avoided main roads, sticking to back alleys and side streets. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every noise made my heart race. As we walked, Shadow Walker filled me in on more details about the cult. "They recruit from all walks of life," she explained. "Politicians, business leaders, even law enforcement. That's how they maintain control and avoid detection." "How did you escape?" I asked, curious about her past. "It wasn't easy," she admitted. "I faked my death, with help from a few allies who also wanted out. We staged a ritual gone wrong, and I disappeared into the chaos. Her story was both terrifying and inspiring. If she could escape, maybe I had a chance too. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, hunted. We reached the next safe house just before dawn. This one was an old farmhouse on the outskirts of the city. We stayed there for the day, resting and preparing for the next leg of our journey. Shadow Walker was meticulous, checking and double-checking our plans. That evening, as we prepared to leave, we heard a noise outside. My heart stopped. We peered through a crack in the door and saw a group of masked figures approaching the house. The cult had found us. "Quick, this way," Shadow Walker whispered, leading me to a hidden door in the floor. It led to an underground tunnel, a secret escape route. We crawled through the tunnel, the sound of footsteps and muffled voices above us. My pulse was pounding in my ears. We emerged in a wooded area behind the farmhouse and started running, not daring to look back. We ran for what felt like hours, the adrenaline keeping us going. Eventually, we slowed, gasping for breath. Shadow Walker checked the map, recalculating our route. We were off track, but still moving in the right direction. As we continued, the reality of the situation hit me hard. This wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was a fight for survival. The cult wouldn't stop until they had me, and maybe not even then. I had to trust Shadow Walker and hope that her plan would work. We reached another safe house, a small cabin in the woods, just as dawn was breaking. Exhausted, we collapsed on the floor, too tired to even think. But sleep wouldn't come easily. The fear, the uncertainty, the constant feeling of being hunted, it was all too much. I looked at Shadow Walker, who seemed just as drained. "Do you think we'll make it?" She met my gaze, her expression serious. "We have to. Giving up isn't an option." Her determination gave me a sliver of hope. We rested for a few hours, then moved again, sticking to the shadows and avoiding any sign of civilization. The journey was grueling, each step filled with tension and fear. We finally reached the border, a desolate stretch of land with a single, guarded crossing. Shadow Walker had contacts there, people who could get us through unnoticed. We waited until nightfall, then made our move. The crossing was nerve-wracking. We stayed hidden, watching as Shadow Walker's contact distracted the guards. When the moment was right, we slipped through, my heart pounding in my chest. Once across, we headed to the safe house, a small, isolated cabin deep in the woods. It wasn't much, but it was safety, at least for now. Shadow Walker assured me we were out of immediate danger, but we couldn't let our guard down. We settled into the cabin, finally able to catch our breath. But the relief was short-lived. The cult was still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they found me. I knew this was just a temporary reprieve, a brief moment of calm in the midst of a storm. As I lay on the makeshift bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The fight was far from over, and the road ahead was uncertain. But with Shadow Walker by my side, I had a glimmer of hope. We settled into the cabin, but I couldn't relax. The cult had found us so easily before. What if they found us again? Shadow Walker seemed confident in our safety, but I remained on edge. The cabin was stocked with supplies, and we had a plan to move deeper into the wilderness if necessary. Shadow Walker spent the next few days teaching me survival skills, how to find food, purify water, and set up traps. She was relentless, pushing me to learn quickly. She explained that if we had to flee, we might not have time to take anything with us. One evening, as we sat around a small fire outside the cabin, I finally asked the question that had been nagging at me. "Why did you really leave the cult? What did you see?" She stared into the flames for a long time before answering. "I believed in their vision at first. They promised enlightenment, power, and control over our own destinies. But the things they did, the sacrifices, the rituals, it was all madness. They were killing people, innocent people, to summon something. I couldn't be part of that anymore." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I knew the cult was dangerous, but this was worse than I'd imagined. Summon something? Like what? She shook her head. "I don't know. Something ancient, powerful. They believed it would grant them ultimate power, but I think it was just an excuse for their sadism." I didn't press further. The look in her eyes told me she was haunted by the memories. Instead, I focused on preparing myself for whatever might come next. A week passed Sid without incident. I started to believe we might actually be safe. Then, one night, I woke to the sound of hushed voices outside the cabin. I froze, straining to hear. Shadow Walker was talking to someone, and I recognized the voice. It was Oracle _ Darkness. My blood ran cold. How had they found us? I crept to the window and peeked outside. There they were, standing by the edge of the clearing, deep in conversation. Shadow Walker didn't seem surprised or alarmed. She looked calm, almost friendly. I felt a surge of betrayal. Had she led me into a trap? My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. I grabbed my bag, quietly stuffing it with essentials. I needed to get out of there before they realized I was awake. But as I moved towards the door, Shadow Walker's voice stopped me. "I know you're listening," she said, her tone cold. "Come out, we need to talk." I had no choice. I stepped outside, trying to look calm. Oracle _ Darkness gave me a smug smile. "Hello again. You've been quite the challenge to track." I glared at Shadow Walker. "You betrayed me." She shook her head. "It's not what you think. I didn't lead them here. They found us on their own, but I made a deal to protect you." Oracle _ Darkness stepped forward. "She's telling the truth. Shadow Walker has been invaluable to us. She agreed to help us in exchange for your safety." My mind was spinning. "What kind of deal?" Shadow Walker sighed. "I told them I'd bring you in, but only if they promised not to harm you. They agreed. They want to use you, not kill you." I felt sick. Use me for what? "To lure out other defectors," Oracle _ Darkness explained. "You're bait. Once they see you're still alive and free, they'll reach out to you. We'll capture them, one by one." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "And you're just going along with this?" I demanded, looking at Shadow Walker. "I didn't have a choice," she said quietly. "It was the only way to keep you alive. They would have found you eventually, and it would have been much worse." I felt a mixture of anger and despair. My only ally had turned against me, and I was trapped. I needed to think, to come up with a plan, but for now, I had to play along. I couldn't afford to make a move until I had a chance to escape. "Fine," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "What do you want me to do?" Oracle _ Darkness smiled. "You're going to send a message to the defectors. Tell them you found a safe place, that you can help them escape. They'll come to you, and we'll be waiting." It was a terrible plan, but I had no choice. I agreed, and we spent the next few hours crafting a message that would lure in the defectors without raising suspicion. I sent it through the same dark web channels I had used before, then waited. The next few days were tense. I stayed close to Shadow Walker, watching her every move. I couldn't trust her, but I needed her to think I did. Oracle _ Darkness stayed nearby, always watching, always waiting. Finally, we got a response. A defector had taken the bait. They were desperate, scared, and willing to meet. We arranged a meeting place, a remote location in the forest, far from any prying eyes. As we prepared to leave, I knew this was my only chance. I had to find a way to escape, to turn the tables on the cult. I couldn't do it alone, but maybe, just maybe, I could use this defector to help me. We reached the meeting spot at dusk. The forest was eerily quiet, the shadows long and menacing. I spotted the defector, a young woman, looking terrified. She glanced around nervously, her eyes wide with fear. I stepped forward, trying to look reassuring. "It's okay, you're safe now." But before I could say more, Oracle _ Darkness emerged from the trees, flanked by masked figures. The defector screamed, trying to run, but they grabbed her, dragging her away. "No!" I shouted, lunging forward, but Shadow Walker held me back. "It's done," she said, her voice cold. "There's nothing you can do." I watched helplessly as they took the defector away. My heart ached with guilt and anger. I had to find a way to stop this, to break free from the cult's grip. But for now, all I could do was bide my time, waiting for the moment to strike. The defector's screams haunted me as we returned to the cabin. I was consumed by guilt and anger. Shadow Walker's betrayal cut deep, but I knew I had to stay calm and think clearly. I needed a plan, a way to turn this around and escape the cult's grasp for good. Over the next few days, I watched and waited. Shadow Walker and Oracle _of_ Darkness were confident, believing I was fully on board with their plan. They didn't realize I was biding my time, looking for the right moment to act. Then, an opportunity presented itself. Another defector reached out, more desperate than the last. The meeting was set in an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. This time, I was determined to use the situation to my advantage. On the day of the meeting, I slipped a small knife into my boot, just in case. Shadow Walker and Oracle _of_ Darkness were focused on the plan, giving me a sliver of hope. We arrived at the factory just as the sun was setting, the place a maze of rusted machinery and crumbling walls. The defector, a man in his 30s, stood trembling in the shadows. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Please," he begged, "I just want to be free." I stepped forward, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're safe now." But before I could say more, Oracle _of_ Darkness and the masked figures appeared, surrounding us. The defector's eyes widened in terror, and I knew I had to act fast. I turned to Shadow Walker, my voice low and urgent. "This has to stop. We can't keep doing this." She hesitated, her resolve wavering. "There's no other way." "There is," I insisted. "Help me take them down. We can end this together." For a moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, but before she could respond, Oracle _of_ Darkness stepped forward, eyes blazing with anger. "Enough! This ends now." With a swift motion, I pulled the knife from my boot and lunged at Oracle _of_ Darkness. The blade found its mark, and they stumbled back, clutching their side. Chaos erupted as the masked figures rushed forward, but Shadow Walker grabbed my arm, pulling me away. "Run!" she shouted, and we bolted into the maze of machinery. We sprinted through the factory, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind us. I could hear Oracle _of_ Darkness yelling orders, but we kept moving, weaving through the dark, narrow passages. My heart pounded in my chest, fear and adrenaline driving me forward. We reached a staircase leading to the roof and scrambled up, emerging into the cool night air. The city lights stretched out before us, a stark contrast to the darkness we were escaping. Shadow Walker looked at me, her expression a mix of determination and regret. "We have to jump," she said, pointing to the adjacent building. "It's our only chance." I glanced at the gap between the buildings, my stomach churning with fear. But there was no time to hesitate. We took a running start and leaped, landing hard on the other side. Pain shot through my legs, but I pushed it aside and kept moving. We made our way down the fire escape and disappeared into the night, leaving the factory and the cult behind. For hours, we ran through the city, sticking to the shadows, avoiding any sign of pursuit. Finally, we found a small abandoned house on the outskirts of town and took refuge inside. As we caught our breath, I turned to Shadow Walker. "Why did you help me?" She sighed, her face etched with exhaustion. "I couldn't let them win. You reminded me of why I left the cult in the first place. I'm sorry for everything." I nodded, too drained to respond. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of our ordeal settling over us. We knew the cult wouldn't give up easily, but for now, we had a chance to regroup and plan our next move. In the days that followed, we worked together to gather resources and create new identities. We stayed off the grid, moving constantly to avoid detection. The cult's reach was vast, but we were determined to stay one step ahead. Shadow Walker taught me everything she knew about survival and evasion. Slowly, I regained my confidence and sense of purpose. We started reaching out to other defectors, helping them escape and dismantle the cult from within. The road ahead was long and dangerous, but we were no longer alone. Together, we had a chance to fight back, to bring the cult down and reclaim our lives. The dark web had led me into a nightmare, but it had also given me a new ally and a reason to keep fighting. And so our journey continued. We would stay hidden, always moving, always vigilant, but we would also resist, striking back whenever we could. The cult had hunted me, but now we were the hunters, determined to end their reign of terror once and for all.